This did not personally happen to me. For all I know, it could be totally made up. But it was just so crazy that it just might be real. Back in mid-2011, I was working a temporary job as a data collector at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. I am a former military service member, and my qualifications landed me the job. Anyway, my job was fairly simple. I would document technical data on new communications equipment being field tested by the Army's Operational Test Command, OTC. One of the technicians who worked with me was also a field technician for DirecTV or Dish. We would work long hours alongside the OTC staff and became good friends. Working long hours out in the middle of nowhere, storytelling became a good way to kill time. On one particular occasion, he shared a very strange story. He recounted working with the satellite provider out of Deming, New Mexico, a small town west of El Paso, Texas. One day, a call came in about a service installation within his area of responsibility. He was assigned a partner, and they both drove out to the property to install the service. The property was a ranch house on the outskirts of the Luna County line, a good driving distance from Deming, New Mexico. When they arrived at the property, they called the owner to inform her that they were at the entrance to her gate. A few minutes later, the owner, an older woman in her 70s or 80s, drove up to open the gate for them. They introduced themselves and proceeded to follow her back to her home. Along the way, he said he noticed a lot of strange sculptures lining the dirt road. The sculptures were made of sheet metal, aluminum, and wood. He said they looked like huge wind chimes, windmills, and other odd forms. What struck him was the size and complexity. Upon arriving at the house, they got to work. Everything seems normal about the property, aside from the sculptures. After an hour or two of working out in the hot New Mexican heat, he and his partner took a break. The old woman came outside and gave them some water and was very friendly. The old woman was very excited about her new service. She told the men her husband had passed away a few years back and she could use the entertainment since she lived by herself. After installing the dish on the roof, the techs asked permission to enter the house to set up the receiver and run the wires. The old woman was a bit hesitant, but agreed to let them in the house. Once inside the home, my friend said both of them became startled. Inside the home were dozens of concrete alien statues. Yes, aliens. Greys to be exact. They were lifelike, had limbs, fingers, eyes, and mouths, and he could see wrinkles and scars, way too precise to be molds or copies. They were everywhere, in the hallway, in the kitchen. No two were the same. They were different sizes, some taller than others. There was no rhyme or reason to them. Some were staring at the wall, some were in the way, just strange. He remembered thinking, who the hell put all of these statues here? Surely, the old woman could not have done that. Nonetheless, the men got to work and decided to keep their thoughts to themselves. A short time later, the woman broke the ice by talking about the concrete statues. She stated that her husband was an engineer with the U.S. Air Force in Roswell in mid-1947. An alien craft crashed at a ranch there. She said her husband not only worked at the crash site, but had proof. He said the old woman shared her late husband's personal photo album. It contained typical photos you would expect to see, wedding pictures and family portraits, but it turned strange when they saw old pictures of alien remains and of the wreckage, almost evidence-like, with measurements, CSI type stuff. He could not believe it. He surely thought this lady was insane or clearly pranking them. The woman went on to explain that government officials and engineers were able to decipher messages and symbols etched into the spaceship. Her husband became obsessed with them. She said her husband, along with the others, were able to decipher that the origins of humanity were at the edge of the moon, whatever that meant. She went on to say that was the reason behind the space race with the Soviet Union, that NASA's missions were some sort of cover-up. The real reason Americans went to the moon was to validate the evidence that they had found in Roswell, NM. She explained that after her husband retired, he was convinced that the origins of humanity were not at the edge of the moon, but at the edge of Luna County. Luna means moon in Spanish. Her husband and she bought a few acres of land at the edge of the county line, and he continued to search for answers and build those strange sculptures until his death. The old woman said that after her husband passed, she became depressed and very ill, and could not continue her husband's work. It was at that time that the Greys started manifesting. At first, it was one, then two. Sometimes they would go weeks without appearing, but over the months, and eventually years, they started manifesting in the dozens. She used the term manifest, meaning that they would just materialize in and out of space and time. She said that they were nocturnal beings and hated the daylight. During the night, they would manifest and keep her company, using telepathy to communicate with her. She said they cured her illness and depression and became very fond of her. She would spend long hours at night talking about humanity, our imperfections, and our destructive nature. She went on to explain that because they were nocturnal, during the day they would sleep or hibernate by turning to stone as a way to protect their bodies from the sunlight. That is why she needed satellite service, because during the day she had nobody to keep her company and she would get bored. My friend remembered experiencing strange feelings of being watched by the statues and experiencing the so-called funhouse effect, becoming disoriented at times. They completed the work and showed the old woman her new satellite service. She was elated. She thanked them for their service, and just like that, it was over. The drive back to Deming was quiet. Who would believe them? Did they say what they thought they did? Was it an elaborate hoax by the old woman? They ended up sharing the story with those who were crazy enough to listen to it. When he shared the story with me, I was dumbfounded. Such a crazy story. Again, not my experience, simply a story that my friend shared with me. Real? Maybe. I don't know. There is no such thing as Area 51. Sorry. And the fact that it's the golden egg of conspiracy theories worldwide is exactly what the US government wants. I'm writing this in a bit of a rush, and I don't have my thoughts organized, so I'm just going to break it down as follows. Groom Lake, Paradise Ranch, Edwards AF Extension, Restricted Training Facility, UX 104. These are just a few names of the place that you know as Area 51. I don't know much about its history, but essentially, it was intended by the US Air Force to be a secret weapons testing facility during the Cold War. It had a few on-site extensions. One of them was for developing experimental rockets and jet engines. One was for training contingents of troops for nuclear warfare and post-apocalyptic survival, etc. But much like the third Star Wars movie, the site and its purpose got out around the time of the Roswell incident, and a media frenzy popularized the base. The government tried at first to quell the speculation about it, but then adopted another strategy: feed into the hype and simply move the base a few dozen miles away. Today, Groom Lake, Area 51, is a small but functional military airport and base. It's got a bunch of bunkers, mostly housing low-security servers, and some munitions tests are performed there. Staff are regularly moved in and out, mostly folks who are low on the totem pole and trying to climb up the ladder to the real facility. There are some very outdated nuclear fallout shelters that are still maintained and used for storage. The facility consumes an enormous amount of power, and everything possible is done to make it look like a well-guarded military base that is engaged in some huge secret operations. The employees really do fly there every day from Las Vegas on conspicuously inconspicuous jets marked as Janet, sometimes referred to as just another non-existent terminal. And they want you to notice and wonder. They want you to wonder where those jets are going, and they never want you to spend 1 second thinking about where they came from. The real Area 51. This is the most exciting part, because as far as I can tell in my limited and clandestine researching, nobody has ever divulged the real secret before. It's pretty highly guarded, and they straight up murder people who are stupid enough to share it. Murder isn't even the right word, They erase people from existence, sometimes entire families. That's why the government freaks out when they find out that one of their employees is terminal and have nothing left to lose. It's why, if you're an employee here, you only see their doctors so that they know about your health before you even know about it. They want you to die real quick of a sudden heart attack so that you never have a moment to think about how you might do a public service and air their dirty laundry. And sometimes they induce those heart attacks when they determine you to be an HMT or health-motivated threat. But I did not need to see a doctor to know that I am suffering from the same malignant tumor that killed my father, glioblastoma multiforme. Every 3 months, we get a health evaluation, and every 6 months, we get a CAT scan. I simply did not report the very damning symptoms this past evaluation, and I will probably be gone before they scan me next. I really wanted to do this instead, maybe just to be the first, I guess. The only other thing I've ever done with my life is fix computers. The real secret military base is McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. The history of the airport was always bound up in military involvement. Before and during World War II, the Army Corps of Engineers and the Air Force were building, storing, training, and doing all sorts of things there. Basically, the government and its corporate benefactors in the military-industrial complex, of course, acquired full ownership of the airport around the time Area 51/Groom Lake exploded in the public eye. It was a rush job and a simple solution. For all intents and purposes, McCarran is an airport. It moves civilians in and out all over the world, just like any other airport on Earth. But its subterranean operations are really something else entirely. First of all, you have to understand the structure of this military base. Because it serves ostensibly as a business of public transportation, every single aspect of the base has dual functions. This is called masking, and it is deployed with remarkable effectiveness at McCarran. To name a few examples, the constant takeoffs and landings of airplanes provide sound camouflage for cutting-edge engine tests. The public completely ignores these sounds and dismiss them as the standard cacophony of airports. Some of the jets themselves are even equipped with technology under test, while others are used to transport hundreds of government employees dressed as vacationing civilians. At any given time in McCarran, up to 6 of the gates are filled with employees of the highest echelons of the US military and government. They sit around on their iPhones, dressed as college kids, in their pajamas or weary businessmen, and they are paid to look the part. The entire base is heavily guarded by plainclothes soldiers, military police, tactical specialists, counter-terrorism forces, and all kinds of soldiers scurry about the airport, dressed like cops, airport security, and desk attendants. Their weapons are usually concealed sidearms. The real firepower is packed by the boys waiting around on the ground. Assault rifles and armor-piercing weaponry is stored around the airport's public spaces in various places. It's not hard to do because nobody is looking for it. And of course, they hire a good number of civilians to work the TSA and other positions. This is called mixing, and it is necessary. What kind of airport would never post any job listings? Have you ever watched the mechanics ducking in and out of the planes outside, or seen your luggage loaded onto the plane as you board? Well, all of that cargo transport activity acts as a cover for the mass movement of special forces, lab equipment, military hardware, exotic building materials, etc. It's not hard to do. They drive one of those rigs by with all of the luggage spilling out of it, and then you instinctively don't question what's on the other 4 rigs behind it. We even have mix-up and spills occasionally, and nobody bats an eye. You are always exposed to some level of radiation while flying, and McCarran, by the way, is why the standard of safe exposure is set where it is at. But excess radiation from weapons testing is vented into the earth and out of the nearby desert. Having an airport to explain the radiation is an effective means of ridding the base of nosy folks with Geiger counters, but the true genius of this top-secret military installation is at the larger scale. The base was built under an airport because of the enormity of its power consumption, but it consumes a lot more power than a regular airport. So it was built in a city that consumes a tremendous amount of power, Las Vegas. So the base is hidden from view, even on the electric power grid. Area 51, not so much, and that is on purpose. Inside the base. So, if Area 51 is the distraction, what do we call the real one? It has many names, but it is usually referred to as the Nexus. That's an acronym, but not many people know what it means, not even me. Everything about the Nexus, from its operations to its structure, is compartmentalized. That means everything is need to know, and virtually nobody knows anything more than their own specific task. You could work in an office in the Nexus doing something like accounting, and never have one single clue what the woman next to you does, or the guy down the hall. They say not even the president knows exactly what's going on there, just a few generals and some dudes in the CIA. The business culture here is insane. It's like North Korea. Everyone is smiling, everyone is fine, and everyone is happy to say just a few phrases about what it is they do, when we're allowed to socialize, which is not much. Every line is bugged, every room has a camera in it, and nobody knows who is watching or listening or when. So that makes you think. Nobody here is telling me the truth about anything. Not even the guy I share an office with. I wonder if any of us know why we are here. People you've worked with for a long time will suddenly get reassigned or have a medical emergency, and you will never see them again. And nobody will remember that person, no matter how many people you ask. I actually got hired to do some programming for the Navy when I was in my early 20s, out of college, and then got sent to Groom Lake to do server tests. They liked my IT/networking skills, so after a series of strange psychological tests and mountains of non-disclosure agreements and background searches, I got offered a job at a facility near Las Vegas proper. Here are a few stipulations of the job, by the way. It's a $1.5 million after-tax lump sum, plus a $220,000 a year stipend, housing, car, and medical paid for, but psychological breakdowns, anxiety attacks, grave health conditions, and family issues void the contract. I also sign approximately 2 new non-disclosure agreements per week, most of which read under penalty of death somewhere. Employees are not allowed to leave the grounds for 5 years, and we all live underground. Term of service is 5 years, then 4 in debriefing, wherein we get to live in Vegas, but report to another facility 4 days a week. We are discharged and observed for the rest of their lives. Our passports are permanently void. We cannot ever leave the continental US. I heard a statistic that 20% of former employees take their own life. I don't know if it's true, but if it is, I bet it's not actually that. The base is underground. It's a network of large structures called hives, which form what is called a colony, or the Nexus. We make lots of Resident Evil jokes, by the way, except unlike in that movie, the government does not try to make its employees feel comfortable with fake forests and windows overlooking digital cityscapes. It is a dark, dreary, Soviet-style labyrinth of halls and bunkers, replete with all sorts of submarine-like features, water and airtight hatches, trap doors, reinforced blast doors, etc. The only exception are the office buildings inside, where chair moisteners like me work. They look just like the office that you work in, except the men with guns standing guard 24/7 everywhere, looking over your shoulder. Oh, and the beautiful, almost surreal glow of the cutting-edge laboratories that pock the lower levels of each building. I've never been in them, but I've passed by a few times. There are 4 hives to my knowledge, although I would not be surprised if there were more. I work in Hive 1. I run some of the servers with a few other guys on one particular floor. There are 16 floors in our hive, but we monitor and maintain all of the servers in Hive 1, so we move around a bit. I've gotten to skim some of the data that passes through, and from what I can tell you, we are the most boring hive. I've compiled the following list based on the things I've intercepted on our network, and also from hearsay from other coworkers. The Nexus has multiple networks, and they are all decentralized, but there are some ways in which they communicate, and it is via those lines of communication which I am privy to some sensitive information. Here is what I know. Hive 1. Finance, accounting, operations, organization divisions, troop training and housing, and some small-scale weapons testing. Hive 2, chemical engineering, some nanotech research, and advanced psychological fitness, whatever that means, for elite military forces. Probably black ops stuff, and how to survive 40 years in solitary confinement in a Siberian prison. I also have reason to believe that this is the hive where the bigwigs meet and live. Hive 3, upper levels equals bioweapon and disease research/testing. If the government has zombies, they've got to be here. I've wanted to make so many goddamn zombie jokes over the years, but I never know which of my coworkers is a rat. Lower levels equals advanced space travel and space warfare technologies, particle engines and gravitational beams and the like. Guessing, no real evidence for this. Science fiction stuff. I once saw an email of all sorts of coded language marked AB, which is widely believed to refer to astrobiology, that is alien life. Maybe it's just some single-celled organisms or fossilized plants from some meteor, or maybe it's something much more advanced. Whatever it is, there must be some reason it's not on the upper levels with all the biologists. Hive 4, total informational blackout. There are encryptions and firewalls and network security features protecting this hive that I have never seen before, not even on top secret Navy projects I worked in the past. I'm being very non-specific in the language that I use to describe our server clusters and networks because I don't want to tell them exactly who I am. They will eventually find out anyway, but there is a widely whispered rumor about Hive 4. Allegedly, the most terrifying thing in the world is in that structure on floor 15. There are a few unusual things about Hive 4. First of all, none of the top brass has clearance to get in there. They access it remotely via video feed in their conference rooms, and materials are often transported from 4 to 2 for physical review. I don't know why our bigwigs won't go into 4, but maybe it's because it's too dangerous. There was one guy who worked in 4 a few years ago when I first started, and he caused the first Nexus-wide lockdown I've ever seen. He was being escorted through one thumpers, what we call the squads of black-booted soldiers that grant access to different hives, and he started shrieking about IDAs. I did not hear his screams, but I heard the gunshot while I was eating lunch. They put a bullet in the back of his head before he could finish his sentence. IDAs, by the way, are interdimensional anomalies. I have no further information on what those are. Another thing I've read minimally about are the twins. I don't know who or what these are, but they are the above top secret gem of Hive 4. It is treasonous to even correspond about them on our secure networks unless you are cleared to do so, and only 4 employees are. I have only seen a few things about them. One was a medical record, no vitals, unusual vocalizations that manifest hallucinations and psychosis in nearby employees, and skin that produces violent nausea when touched. The document was basically speculation that the skin functions much like the Australian stinging tree or a jellyfish. I read documents about people who worked with them as well. In 4, a woman was remanded to the psychological ward after being in the same room as them, and a soldier who stood outside the laboratory where they are kept basically took his own life. Specifically, he peeked inside during a routine access, then began bashing his own brains out with the butt of a pistol while singing an Irish folk song. The woman who was remanded to psych was even weirder. During breakfast with her colleagues, she grabbed a fork, stood up, walked out of the mess hall, stripped all of her clothes off, blinded herself in both eyes, then somehow managed to make her way all the way up to floor 1, where the access to the corridor to Hive 3 is located. How she managed to operate the dozens of keycode readers, passcode boxes, and retinal scanners is still under review. Last email regarding her was sent in 2012 about how she sits in the dark of solitary on floor 11 psych ward with a permanent and blissful grin on her face. One of my colleagues whom I trust told me that he saw the twins once through hacked access to a video feed. He said they are woman-like, about twice as tall as a full-grown man, with unidentifiable black growths dangling from their heads like hair but thicker, and they basically float a few inches off the ground and drag their toes lightly as they move. They are utterly pale. He never saw the faces, but claims that they appear to distort reality, or at least the video feed, in such a way that space looks bent around them. Perhaps these are the IDAs that the earlier dude was screaming about. This is all I have for now, but hopefully the world knows the truth someday about what goes on down here. We are all basically prisoners. We have very limited and supervised access to the internet, so if you don't hear from me again, assume they figured me out. B-May, 19, accepts an internship at an old jail, now museum, located behind the county courthouse. Building was used as a jail from 1876 to 1990. Get the tour. Taken up 3 flights of stairs up to the attic. The attic is large and open. No electricity running up to it. They used a construction lamp with an extension cord running downstairs. The vast space was pretty much used for storage at that point. My boss explains that when the town prospered, they ran out of room to do hanging-styled executions out back, so they started doing them in the attic. Well, okay. Weeks into my internship, I get tasked with going up to the attic to search the wardrobe trunks for costumes. Head up to the attic. Construction lamp is immediately to the left of the door, lighting the whole area. Past the light, it obviously dims the whole room. Back turned towards the door, digging out dresses in the trunk. Here's someone walking up the creaky stairs. Whole room dims, as if someone walked in front of the light. Me, thinking it was only the other intern. I can't find what they want. I'm just going to start bringing down random dresses. No response. Turn around. No one is there. Grab dresses and nope the hell out. Get downstairs and ask if someone came upstairs. Nope. My boss starts smiling. I guess Ralph was curious about you. What? She proceeds to tell me about an inmate named Ralph, hung in the attic for killing his mother. She tells me how over the years, weird stuff kept happening. Shows me pictures of the museum getting trashed at night, twins taken from the shed, wrapped all around the building. Mind you that the shed and back of the building is enclosed by a 15-foot fence with barbed wire and tossed over the 3-story building and wrapped around the smokestack. The creepiest place in the building were the dungeon-like cells in the basement. We were refused access to the juvenile dungeon cells that were only accessible by a trap door in the floor. I used to work in an old-age home. Aside from the more mundane horrors, like genitals literally sagging past the knees and such, there was one lady in particular who was eerie, among some other stories. The place I worked in had a big central room, and 4 wings branching off from it in a squashed X formation. Fitting, eh? This woman was in a mostly empty branch, way at the end of the hall, so going to her room for anything meant that you were pretty far away from anybody else, except for her. At night, the only lights kept on were some dim ones every 20 feet or so in the hallways, so to go to and from her room, you had to pass through dark areas. Not too bad. Whenever I worked the 3rd shift, like clockwork, her alarm would go off around 3 or 4 a.m. Now this woman uses a wheelchair, mind you, and like many her age / in her condition, she was slow as all hell, but her alarm would ring, which only happens when someone pushes their little button necklace. Only every time, hers would be hanging on the wall across from her bed. They're supposed to keep them on their nightstand in case something happens, but this lady never listened. First few times, we thought that maybe the batteries were dying. Replaced the batteries. Eventually just gave her a new alarm. Still rang at the same times every night. No way she could have done it, being as old and slow as she is. As this goes on, lady goes downhill fast. She's losing a lot of weight. Her hair is falling out more and more, and she's basically looking really frail and sick, despite doctors not finding anything wrong with her. Lady is still energetic somehow, despite it all, so eventually we figure it's just her age, and her body is just getting ready for death. Now, part of our job was to bathe these people, and it's important that we check them for bruises, swelling, etc. Anything that could be a sign of natural illness or even abuse, be it from other workers, other old occupants, even what they might do to themselves. One day I'm working a double shift, so shift 2 and 3. While shift 3 is mostly just doing rounds to make sure none of the elderly croaked in their sleep. Second shift takes them to dinner, gets them ready for bed, etc. Another worker is assigned to give this lady a bath this night, and it's not just a few minutes into it that we hear a scream. Then the worker, speaking on our little walkie-talkies that we are required to use. She tells us in a shaky voice that she needs someone immediately, that something is really wrong. I'm really nosy, so of course, I am the first to volunteer. I get down to this room, and my coworker is as white as a sheet. She does not say anything, just points into the private bathroom at the little old lady sitting on her shower seat without a care in the world. Nothing seems wrong at first, but then I look at her back. Somehow, this lady has 2 spots of skin missing from her back, right on the inner corner areas of her shoulder blades, and even though the woman had a bath not 2 nights before and was completely fine, somehow, these wounds looked half-healed, like they'd been there for a while. What the hell? Since she's not bleeding and doesn't seem to be in pain, we dress her in a robe and wheel her on down to the nurse's station. Nurses are just as shocked and can't figure out what the hell is going on. She was fine throughout the day, but suddenly, here they are. So we start questioning her, figuring someone must have hurt her and she'd know what was going on, or might be able to give us a clue. She smiles and says it's just her wings growing in, that the angel is helping her get to heaven faster. So we have to file an official report, and we end up just patching up the wounds for now, giving her a sponge bath and putting her to sleep. Her room alarm does not ring all that night, and my shift ends. I come back later that night for my next shift to find out that the woman died that night, apparently peacefully and from old age.